Ancient voices, living voices, the sage message. From the beginning of time, they have always known, from the spirits of the elders, the truth comes home together. Ancient knowing living voice, the sage message.
Hello. Welcome to yet another episode of Sage Sundays with Ikukulabangun. Now, children of the light, I am exhausted. It's been a long week. I have a lot of work to do and it's just been crazy times of late. So I am quite exhausted. Having said that, the plan is for this week to be more of a mini-sode because the last episode ran so long. So I'm hoping like this week is a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am kind of vibe. Having said that, I have been thinking about my exhaustion and what I can do to align myself and get back in a good flow state before I begin the next week. And in thinking about that, I then thought about the idea of spiritual hygiene, how we go about maintaining ourselves day to day, week to week, month to month, to ensure we're aligned and able to remain in communion with our spirit, pretty much. And I talk about being in communion with the spirit so often, I don't think it's something that I need to clarify. I approach my life goals in 12-week phases as opposed to the typical 52 weeks that people will aim for when they enact their New Year's resolutions. I focus on a 12-week cycle. And my year ordinarily will begin in September, which is springtime in the southern hemisphere, where I was born. So I like to think my body clock is still aligned to the southern hemisphere, regardless of me living in the northern hemisphere, but I focus on that. So I'm heading into a fresh 12 weeks and I'm in this planning phase and reflection phase and thinking about what I want to accomplish in the next 12 weeks. And oftentimes I will give myself a week. So the first week of a 12-week sprint is dedicated to planning and reflection and thinking my goals through. And it hasn't been very different in planning through the last 12 episodes of the podcast. I made the decision to do this earlier on in the year, but I didn't quite get moving on it until I was sure that I could pull out the 12 episodes that I needed for the sprint. So I focused on releasing the first episode of the podcast at an astrologically fertile time. And that's another benefit, right? That if you are more conscientized spiritually, then you also know how to align your planning to the most optimal timing in your life. And you could consider astrology in that. You could consider numerology in that as well. That's another big one for me. I tend to align what personal number a year is to what I plan to achieve in that year. And so there's lots of things that go into it, really, when I think about my planning. Having said that, in order to be sure that the plans I'm making can take shape, that the things that I choose to manifest can come into realization in this realm, then a lot of it comes down to me maintaining my spiritual hygiene, right? Because the thing is, it doesn't matter how great a manifester I am if my aura doesn't radiate the right vibe, if I could put it that way. Because sometimes you outperform your own expectations based on simply maintaining your spiritual alignment, showing up in the right ways, and trying to do everything that you are meant to do in order for something to go well. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about perhaps what is expected of us when we make the decision to integrate our spirituality into our everyday routines and to establish how much influence we have. I know in the last episode, I said one of my lessons had been that we exist in the past and everything we are experiencing in our lives has kind of been pre-configured into our destiny, if I could put it that way. However, it is possible to exceed the expectations that have been set out for you by making a series of good decisions, by ensuring that you are aligned and in tune with your spirit. More can then be channeled towards you, right? Your level of abundance can be heightened because of that. In the same way, consistent underperformance will lead to a recalibration of possible abundance. So if you underperform, you can be downgraded and put on a low performance program when in fact you were supposed to be in the high achievers program, right? And if you exceed expectations in the high achievers program, then you can be upgraded and put into the advanced program as well. So I still believe that on some level, we can influence our outcomes. And because of that, I was hoping that we could explore what is within grasp, what is within our control, and how we can contribute to these outcomes. And so I have framed today's reflections based on frequently asked questions that I receive during consultations from people. And typically, once we have identified the root cause of an issue that someone is dealing with, then they will outline steps that need to be taken to contain the issue. And in cases of a lack of alignment or attunement, then I'll often recommend we establish a spiritual routine. And I've mentioned how I plan in 12-week sprints, and it was because of a book that I read a few years ago that described the method. And being the researcher that I am, I tested the methodology and it made sense, so I kept it, right? And so the same applies when I speak to people who I'm helping create new patterns in their life. I tend to focus on making atomic changes, which would make it easier to effect whatever change is being recommended. And so in most cases, when I speak to people, I never recommend going from 0 to 100 unless there's an acute matter that requires immediate attention. If you came to me and you are now deep in dysfunction and quite ill and your people are big mad, then it might be a little more intense. But generally, my approach is to ease people into new habits, right? And I use, like I said, tiny incremental steps in this process. And the first thing that I try to do is to encourage people to talk to their people. So in the past, I've said to you that the most important thing is for you to pray or upahle, whichever of these two words make more sense to you. And once I say to people, you need to pray, you need to communicate with your people more. And I will help you figure out what the tools are. So do you need water? Do you need impepo? Do you need snuff? Because it differs from family to family. And sometimes you already know this because you've seen it being done in your family. So you kind of know already what is needed and when and why and how. So the question would then be, Makosi, how often should I phahla or pray? And I often say in the beginning, once a week is enough. Right? Because I'm not trying to get you to do the most here. And intention will always supersede anything else. So my aim is always to say at the beginning, aim to pray once a week. And then another question that would follow would be, do I need a community to pray? And by community, I'm talking about your family, I'm talking about a spouse, I'm talking about children, anything. And the fact of the matter is, I often encourage people to take it one step at a time by focusing on themselves first. And a useful analogy for this is how on an airplane, they'll always say to us, in case of emergency, if the oxygen masks are released, make sure you put yours on first before you try and help anyone else. And a lot of it is to do with how the blind cannot lead the blind. So I often say to people, you don't need a community to pray. You need consistency to establish and maintain that connection. So in the first instance, pray once a week and focus on doing it consistently on your own. Primarily because you're initiating a journey of self-discovery. And I don't think anybody who is new to something or trying to remedy something should also have the responsibility of explaining themselves to others, because it's a highly individualistic experience in this sense, because sometimes the responsibility is on you and nobody else in the family. And you need to clarify your duties and responsibilities before you can take charge and start to command the ship, if I could put it that way. So those two, very NB and important for us to keep in mind. And then the next question is often, does consistency mean anything for my spiritual practice? And I think you know my answer is going to be yes. Consistency means you become more comfortable and sharpen your third eye to a point where you are able to independently receive messages and communicate changes and such. And so because of that, I'll often say to people, consistency trumps everything else. Rather show up and say nothing than not show up at all. So if you're wondering about the top 3 things that you can do to get yourself aligned in the first instance, is aim to pray alone once a week. And ensure you show up consistently. And usually I'd say you need to go 4 times, and then you can add an enhancement. And we can talk about some of the enhancements a little later on. Okay, so now we have praying or ukphahla on lock. What else needs to happen? If you haven't been in alignment for a long time, then it's highly likely that you're going to need a cleanse. This is only something that a healer can effectively establish. Okay, so I don't want to speculate, but there's a high likelihood that you will need a cleanse in order to come into full alignment with your spirit. There's nothing stopping you from ukphahla, and your people may even point out to you that, kufuneka uye emanzini, no, kufuneka uye enhlane, whatever. Because remember, establishing that connection means you're able to dream, right? And once you dream and you start listening to the subconscious messaging that's coming through, then this is where these things tend to be clearer, right? So it's not necessarily that a healer is the one that's going to tell you that you need a cleanse. In an ideal world, you ought to know through your dreams that I may need to go to the water based on my dreams, and then the healer tell you the why. So you need to think about it in terms of a collaboration as opposed to a top-down kind of thing. So your healer doesn't really drive the bus. You and the healer need to come into understanding, because ultimately you have to take responsibility for your well-being. Remember that, right? And it's important for me to say to you that the initial cleanse is not separate from you incorporating routine cleansing into your spiritual hygiene practice. In an ideal world, you should find a routine that you can incorporate into your monthly routines, right? The same way you have a maintenance day where you get hair, nails, body done, right? Is the same way you should have a spiritual maintenance day where you take care of spirit and you cleanse the month away. I was moaning about how tired I am, how it's been 12 weeks, and. But I'm also aware of how I'm due for a cleanse, because each time I have a consultation, each time I talk to somebody, I kind of take on that person's emotions and feelings and issues. And so I frequently need to release on some level, right? So there's that to think about as well. You need to have a sense of awareness and get yourself into a rhythm when it comes to your cleansing. And then another question, and often a controversial one, is, can I continue drinking, smoking, overeating, or binge eating, or whatever your predilection is, right? And I don't want to be a party pooper. But anything that diminishes your consciousness is a problem. If an activity does not raise your consciousness, that is a problem. I'm not saying awekho amadlozi that need a smoke to reach alignment. I'm saying that doesn't really happen out of nowhere. You need to know who, why, and where. And then the same applies with alcohol. If you need to drink, ngoba ungumuntu wabantu abadala, it's very different to just drinking because you can and being surprised that then you don't drink because ulala udakiwe every day. How can you? Or that nobody can come through to you because you're not vibrating at the right frequency. Because the point of your spiritual hygiene practice is to raise your vibration. It's to ensure you are aligned and tuned in to the same frequency as abantu bagini. And most good spirits will more often than not vibrate at a higher frequency than us mere mortals. So you need to challenge yourself on some level. And to raise your vibration, I'll often encourage people to stop the alcohol, psychedelics, smoking, sugar, and all of this. And I'm well aware it's really difficult. I mean, everybody struggles with it. But I'll also be the first person to tell you how the closer you are to alignment, the easier it is to fill those voids that you create by cutting out your vices with healthier coping mechanisms. Because when you make the decision to maintain a high frequency vibration, what you're saying is, I fear nothing. I want to face my issues. I want to show up for myself consistently. I want to be the best version of myself. I am tapping into the highest existence of me and channeling from that space. So to do that, there will be pain. There will be a little suffering, but like I've said over and over and over again, the rewards of abundance are also quite great. So having said that, I feel like I've been talking for long enough. I will say one last thing. When you make the decision to turn things around, I often remind the people that I'm helping that confidentiality is key. Evil eye is a thing, and jinxing yourself is also a possibility. So keep things to yourself. It's very important for you to keep things to yourself. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about protecting your dreams. Once the channel is open, right? Because we'll do all of this to get that channel open. And once the dreams start flowing, not every dream that you should tell anybody because you're like, oh, but what does this mean? If you have a dream and you don't understand it, teach yourself to go back to the people that gave you the dream. Because remember, you are learning a new language. And so where there's misunderstanding, where there's a gap in message delivery, you must go back to the source, because that's how you establish and maintain that high vibration connection. Having said that, I did say I was a bit tired, so I would like to go and focus on pouring into my cup for the rest of this Sunday. As always, you are loved.
Ancient voices, living voices, the sage message.